This is Econ Solutions, looking at revenue theory and market structures in the Unit 3 topic content. So the first thing I want to talk about is some definitions that you'll need to know moving forward. Now, I'm not a huge fan of learning definitions by rote, but I think these are some key ones that would be really useful moving forward in the chapter. So the first one is a pure monopoly, which exists where there's only one firm in the market. So traditionally a firm like British Gas, where they owned all the pipelines that sourced gas, then they were able to sell as a single firm to the market. No one else could compete. An oligopoly exists where there's a few firms that dominate the market share. So things like supermarkets, where you've got a couple of firms or maybe 3 or 4 that are dominating that market share. Perfect competition exists in a market that contains a lot of firms, and it also satisfies 6 other conditions of things like being a price taker and also selling a homogeneous product. So I'll talk about those 6 conditions later in the video. Monopolistic competition is where firms have many competitors, so similar to perfect competition, but where it differs is that it's got a different product. So the product is differentiated, it's non-homogeneous. So now you've got those definitions, it will make more sense about where the market structures lie along this line. So as you can see, you've got 2 polar opposites in a monopoly and perfect competition. Now the reason for that is a monopoly is one firm that sets its own price and dominates the market. However, with perfect competition, you've got many firms, and you also have these 6 other conditions. The key is you've got many firms and you're a price taker, not a price maker. So in perfect competition, you take whatever price the market is willing to give you, and in a monopoly, you're allowed to set your own price as you're the only firm selling. Now you do have other market structures within this, as these are the 2 polar opposites, and you have things in the middle, such as monopolistic competition, oligopolies, duopolies, etc. So I'll show you where those 3 lie. So as you can see, oligopoly and duopoly, where there's a few firms in the market dominating the market share, is quite close to a monopoly. Duopoly is a special case where there's 2 firms in the market, and then monopolistic competition, sort of closer to perfect competition, where you've got a lot of firms, but in fact you're selling differentiated products. Now monopolistic competition, oligopoly and duopoly, these are more commonly found things within the market. So in a way, they're more important, but the foundations of your economic theory should start at knowing what perfect competition is and knowing what monopoly is, to then understand how our market comes about. And these are the key market structures you're going to need to learn about and know eventually for your 25 mark essay. So the next thing I want to talk about is revenue curves in perfect competition and monopolies. So the first thing to know in perfect competition to do with the revenue curves is that average revenue and marginal revenue are equal to the same thing. Now the average revenue is equal to the total revenue divided by the output, and the marginal revenue is the change in total revenue divided by the output. So if you think of it in terms of if your average revenue, if you sold 10 goods at £10, so your ruling market price was £10, you sold 10 of those, so it'd be £100 total revenue, but you sold 10, which was your output, you get an average revenue of £10. Now with your marginal revenue, because this curve is perfectly elastic and horizontal, you're selling at the same price at every point along the curve. So your change in total revenue will always be £10 if you sell 1 good, and 10 divided by our 1 will give us also 10. And this is the same, this calculation works out at every point along the line. So therefore the average revenue is equal to the marginal revenue. It can also be said that this price because in perfect competition you can sell any given amount at the ruling market price, you can clear your production line. This is also the demand curve for this product. The reason it says no sales and no cents is because if you rise your price to P2, now you can go and buy, because there's many firms at P1, so you can go somewhere else quite easily and get it for the price P1, so you wouldn't buy at P2. The reason it says no cents is because you can clear your production line at P1, so if you sold at P3 you wouldn't get as much revenue as you would at P1, and you'd still clear your production line at either price, so it wouldn't make any sense. But the key thing to note is that your average revenue and your marginal revenue are equal to the same thing. The next thing I want to talk about is the revenue curves in a monopoly. Now, as you can see, they're not the same thing, so MR is not equal to AR here. What you can see is that MR is actually a lot steeper than your average revenue. And if you think as your average revenue falls, as your marginal revenue falls, so for each good your revenue is decreasing, your average revenue is going to be pulled down as well. So you can see that relationship here. However, the MR curve is actually twice as steep as the average revenue curve. Now for unit 3, all you need to know is that it's twice as steep, and as the marginal revenue curve falls, so does the average revenue curve. If you'd like to understand why it's twice as steep, as in every situation it's twice as steep, the reason for that is you'd have to go into calculus to see how these equations are derived for marginal revenue and average revenue, and just use some differential calculus, but you don't need to know this for unit 3. So the key thing you need to note is that it's twice as steep. Now if you'd like me to explain exactly using differential calculus why it's twice as steep, just comment below and I'll put up a video of that as well. But the key things to take from this video are the market structures, how the revenue curves are with MR equaling AR in perfect competition, and then also that in a monopoly the MR curve is twice as steep as the AR curve.